Hi, y'all. It's Laura, and welcome back to Homeschooling with Classic Stories. This week was week 4, and we worked on the story of Benjamin Bunny. So, I wanted to tell you about the things that we did this week. So, first off, let's start with movement. What we did for movement was we're still in not really quarantine where we live, but we are still preferring to sort of stay more at home. So for movement, we focused on the scarecrow and we did some scarecrow dressing. And this week we actually incorporated my 2.5-year-old as well. And so my husband, myself, our 4.5-year-old, and our 2.5-year-old did scarecrow dressing. And so what we did is my husband and I went first. And so we each took a child. And all that we did was as fast as we could, we did sort of a relay race of putting on first like a winter hat, like this sort of hat, winter hat, and then wrapping a scarf and then putting on a jacket. And so sort of first to win sort of thing. But then we rotated it around and the kids dressed us. As a hint, obviously we're both taller than our children, so we sat down for this. So we sat down and the kids put on hat, scarf, which was surprisingly dangerous, and perhaps not surprising to you. Maybe you could see that coming, but this motion from a 2.5-year-old was not great. Um, but the scarf, and then trying to put on our jackets, which was quite a challenge for both children, actually. But it was really enjoyable. They wanted to do it several times, and it was a good way to have them running back and forth across our living room. And they had a lot of fun doing it. Both of them together did. So that was our movement activity was scarecrow dressing. We had already talked a bit about scarecrows when we had read the story, but we also then looked at some scarecrow pictures, cartoon-based scarecrow pictures. So they had an idea of what a scarecrow was meant to be. So it was very cute. Anyway, then the next thing that we did was critical thinking. And this was really focused on estimating this week. My son is not great at estimating because he's 4.5. So usually when I ask him to estimate something, his answer is always 1 billion, or some strange, really high made up, you know, fabricated number of some sort. So what we did was this week, if you recall in the story, they are in Mr. McGregor's garden and they've collected some onions within a like a blanket handkerchief and they're slowly falling out. These onions are slowly falling out across a couple of seeds. So what we did was kind of estimating around that was how many onions, how many can you fit into this thing? And this was actually really fun to do. We did it all with paper products and we did it all with marbles. My son loves marbles. I've mentioned that in previous videos. So anytime I can get him to use marbles, he is really excited about that. Some other things that I thought we could have used that are sort of similar in size and shape. I thought that maybe we could have done something like M&M's, Skittles, some sort of little candy. Um, Something of a similar size and shape would have also been a good substitute for that. I also thought about popping popcorn, but popcorn does turn out to be irregularly shaped, which could actually kind of add to the fun, but it just wasn't what we ended up doing. So I'll show you how we did it and sort of explain at the same time. So we did it all with paper-based products that were small because I thought that that would be simpler than trying to do like a fabric handkerchief because then how do the things like how do you reach an endpoint? Well, this is a sheet of toilet paper. Don't be jealous, Americans. We have toilet paper where I live. So this is a sheet of toilet paper, and so basically, what I did was I asked him, so how many do you think can fit on here before it's too many? And so he took a guess, and as we did this more, the better he got at it. So basically, what I did was, okay, so I would hold it, just as a hint, I would hold it. And then kind of did it up into sort of like a little handkerchief. Then he would put some marbles in. until it broke. And we did this, so just keep going until the thing spills out or breaks or whatever. Anyway, so he got better at the idea of estimating based on like the size of what we were using. We did this with several things. So we have, this is gonna make us sound terrible, but so we did this first because it was the smallest. We collect napkins. I don't know. I feel weird when I'm at a restaurant or something and somebody brings me a napkin and I don't use all of them. And so I just kind of stick them in my purse. I hope other people do that. If you do that, please leave a comment below and make me feel not so terrible. But I don't want to leave the napkin sitting there because it's just going to get thrown out. Anyway, I'm just justifying my bad behavior. So we have various shapes of napkins as a result of this from a lot of different places. So like a coffee shop napkin is actually very similar in size to this. Because it's like a cocktail napkin, but like it's a lot stronger. So that was really interesting because he guessed the same number because of the size, but it didn't work out that way because it's firmer. Um, McDonald's napkins are surprisingly sturdy. Um, in fact, that we did with a couple of different ways. So, like, first we did it the way McDonald's folds it. So it is kind of folded, and then took it apart, like unwrapped it to make it much larger of a surface area. And it was still decently sturdy, even though it didn't have any folding to it. So that was a little surprising. But that is me being enamored with paper product quality and not me telling you what we did. So basically, what he did was he estimated. His guesses got better. He stopped saying things like a bajillion. So that was sort of the goal for critical thinking this week, was to make sure that he had an idea of reasonable estimates. And it was fine, especially after he did the first two. The first one gave him an idea of like sort of the relative numbers we were working at with. And then by the second one, like he was making very reasonable assumptions. None were correct, but that wasn't the point. So just sort of the idea of making reasonable assumptions instead of just a billion. So anyway, the last thing that we did was sort of math based. It's very clock based, and so it's not sort of math based. It's clock based, so it's math based. But in the story, if you recall, the cat sits on top of the basket with bunnies underneath for 5 hours. So I wanted to do an activity that involved skip counting to an extent. Um, I don't really want to push skip counting yet too hard because that's just memory work. And I'd rather that he spent some time really understanding what skip counting is about before we just do straight memory work of it. So I wanted to do the by fives as a result of that. And then because it's 5 hours, I thought that we would incorporate the clocks. And then as I was making it, I realized that I was making, um, you know, the same angle based on it being 5 hours. And so I wanted him to also notice um, that the 5 hours was the same regardless. And from what he drew, I think you can see it didn't quite work out the way that I wanted it to. So let me go ahead and before you do this with your child, let me go ahead and preview that my son does already know the clock numbers. You see that these clocks are unlabeled. Kind of half the clocks in our house are unlabeled and half of them are traditionally labeled with the numbers and whatnot. So my son is very good at, he knows that 12 is here and then 3 and then so on. So there are no numbers on this. If your child does not know the numbers around the clock face, go ahead and do that numbering first with your child. Otherwise, this is going to be more frustrating than anything else. So go ahead and do that first if your child isn't sure of where the placement of the numbers is. Then what I had him do was I had him pick two colors. That's why you see two colors. I don't know if you can actually see that. One is maroon and one is brown. Those seem to be his favorites lately. And then it has numbers for you to do. So 4 to 9. So first he drew a line out to 4. So for this one, he drew a line out to 4, and then he also drew a line out to 9. And then we counted the hours in between to know that it was 5 hours forward, sorry. And then he colored it to show the passing of time. So how much time had passed? 5 hours had passed. And these two up at the top are actually the best examples of, look, the 5 hours are the same no matter where you put them on the clock. Something that I didn't count on for this, I didn't count on him not getting his dots in the middle. Once he started doing that, it threw off the angle. So that's why you see that this kind of looks like a weird, not quite half, but sort of like half, which of course isn't 5 hours. And so it doesn't really match in angles. So for you, I would suggest that you go ahead and do your own dots towards the middle so that they have something to work from in the middle. That way you can avoid this particular problem of the angle moving because that center dot moved. So anyway, he did a really great job of noticing the things that I wanted him to notice. So he noticed that how far the distance of 5 was. So he noticed that between 4 to 9 was 5, and he noticed the different sections. He also got some practice at remembering where all the places were on the clock, which he loved. He really loves clocks. So that worked out really nicely. And then noticing the angles. I was saying things like angle and such, but that wasn't an arc. Um, but that wasn't really the point. The point is just to say math language around your child so that they kind of have an idea of where things are associated. Um, but he did notice that these were all meant to be the same because they were all 5 hours. So that did work out the way that I wanted him to, even though some of this happened. So overall, I think that this was successful. Again, I would just make sure that you put the dots in, but maybe your child can probably do the rest of it. So anyway, it's not the most beautiful of the worksheets, but this was a nice one to do for kind of the idea of 5, skip counting, and then kind of incorporating clocks as well. So that was actually decent for it. And of course, you see my son's coloring is, it's progressing. So anyway, that's what we did this week for the various parts for talking about movement and critical thinking and math. So next week we will start on week 5. So we are continuing in our Beatrix Potter series. So I will see you for the reading for that. Have a nice week.